This is Manny with Manifest, and we're here to talk about, I think, a hard hitting question that's been hitting a lot of players recently. Where it's like, oh man, I'm playing the list that topped X Treasure Cup or X Regional or X 1K tournament, you know, and then you play it and you're like, why is it not working? It works because blank person got top, and that's something that maybe that we're gonna try to hit on today. Maybe help guide you into what deck fits you better as a player, with what the main idea of what the deck is supposed to do, and then talk on and then talk along the way of, even though this may be the best deck, it may not be the best deck for you. So let's go ahead and go into it. So the first thing, so the first thing we're gonna go through is we're gonna go through all the starter decks first. So the starter deck leaders, and then we'll go by all leaders by color to make things easier and more clear. So the first thing we're gonna go through is the Luffy. So Luffy, leader effect, he can give a rested Dawn to himself or to any character. This is the very like bare bones leader in the whole game. It's very 1 + 1 = 2. There's cool things you could do with it, but this leader specifically meant to be the easy learning curve. And the concept with him is literally just, I play. So red as a color, it's for people who play Magic, will kind of resonate with this a bit more. It's a very like red deck in Magic. It's very rush. It's very, I play my bodies and my bodies are gonna hit you. What Luffy does is that he makes your bodies, when you pay your Dawn, he makes them a bit bigger because he gets to give rest to Dawn. So in bigger as in they have bigger stats, or he could give them Dawn so they can use their effects. That's just where that comes into, and he's just a very stationary character. I think when you're learning the game, Luffy is a great place to just play, because what he teaches is proper sequencing and proper Dawn management. And Dawn management is a very important skill that in this game needs to be taught. So that's my opinions on Luffy, where it's just a very straightforward, balanced character. And then when it comes to the colors of cards, like, we're just gonna go over leaders right now. I may make another video about how cards are meant to interact, but right now we're just gonna talk about leaders. So that's Luffy. Then we have Kid. Now, what makes Kid very strong is that he's a very aggressive leader. He's a type of leader that if you have a hard time controlling the board, he could do it on his own. Now, that's not what green does, but that's why green could lean on him, is because if you need 2 attacks, he can give you those 2 attacks. This leader is a very standalone leader. Your deck could literally have whatever cards in it, and he's just a very strong standalone leader. Now, what green does as a whole, it's that they have cards that they play on curve. And for people who don't understand what curve means, is that if I'm on 3 Dawn, I'm going to play a character that its cost is 3 Dawn. That's what playing on curve is that whatever Dawn I'm on, I have a character that I could drop and maximize my Dawn. So that's what green does, and all their cards are very well statted. But Kid is the example of my deck does one thing and I'm doing something else, or I have the possibility to do something else. And that's where this is the first leader we get where it's like my deck does one thing, I'm doing another thing. Because most leaders, the deck and the leader intertwine. He's the only one that goes, my deck could do this and I will do this. So he's a very where you want your leader to do something different than what your deck wants to do. All right. Now we go the crocodile. His ability is, you get 4 Dawn from your board, put it back in the deck, bounce a 5 or lower character back to the owner's hand. What blue is, and funny enough, it goes back to the Magic players. They'll pick this up better. Blue does what blue does, like in Magic, where it's all about control, resources, and controlling the board. Now blue, unfortunately, in One Piece as of OP1 or set 1, it's not the worst place, but it's not the best place. Unfortunately, the only blue leader as of set 1 that goes toe to toe is Doflamingo. And there's no bias there. It's just he's the only one that shows some results versus the other ones that don't even show results, which is unfortunate because I think blue is a very fun color to play. But if you're trying to figure out if you're a control player without having to practice so many tricks, Crocodile's a good strong start. He's kind of like Kid, where it's like my leader does a thing, but my deck doesn't have to revolve around my leader. He's another leader like that, whereas that like this leader is more of a power play versus you build your deck around it. Granted, he does have a Baroque's Work deck, but there's another Crocodile leader that works better for the on-theme deck than this one does. But this is the best leader to practice your control mentality of like, do I like the idea of I play, bounce their things, and playing on tempo. So what tempo is when it comes to card games is, imagine if I put down a block on a table, and then my opponent puts a block, and now I play a block, but my block takes away their block. I'm now controlling the tempo because the tempo of blue is drop, 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 drop. Now your opponent, for blue to be strong, also has to play drop, 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 because your characters could pick up their characters and put it back in the hand. They're losing tempo because they're not able to drop characters on turn and them stay. So that's where blue comes into his strength, where it's that I'm controlling the board not by destruction or anything in those means. It's more of that during the process of building the board, I am interrupting them. And that's where people are getting confused on tempo versus control. They have a lot of similarities, but tempo and control are two different things. And blue excels in tempo, not in control. And we'll go into more about control when we get to purple, because purple is a more of a control deck versus blue. Blue is more of a tempo deck. And that's where I think some players have the weird confusion, especially when it comes to blue. Now, we're done with blue for now. We're going to get back to blue later. But for now, we're good with blue. Now we're going to go to Kaido, our first purple leader. He is the definition of I will kill you when I need to kill you. And his leader ability is send 7 Dawn back to the Dawn deck. 7 Dawn back to the Dawn deck to then burn your opponent's life. So with that said, he's honestly there for the very late game, the very end of the game. You'll never, more often than not, 99% of the time, you'll never use his effect twice in one game. If you use his effect twice in one game, both you and your opponent were playing this game wrong. But his effect is truly the definition of we're ending the game when I choose the end of the game. And because of that, where you have a leader where odds are you're only using his effect once a game, it's a whole, you have to be able to control the game so you could position yourself to be in that position of what people call in the One Piece community the kill combo. And essentially what the kill combo is, the real fast thing, it's at the bare minimum, you dropped the 10-drop Kaido, which he blows up the whole board. And then he eats 5 Dawn to blow up the board. On your next turn, you're going to have 7 Dawn. This is where the kill combo begins. Because your opponent has blockers, then obviously it's better. But what the kill combo is, in its essence, it's you get the 7 Dawn, give it to the leader. Because the 10 cost Kaido is 12k. You give the 7 Dawn to your leader. You swing with your leader first. And you do this when your opponent has 2 life. So now you swing 12k with your leader. Odds are your opponent doesn't have the guard, so they lose a life. Now with the 7 Dawn you just used on the Kaido, you send those away to burn the last one. Then you swing with the 12k for game. That's what the kill combo is. It's a very simple combo. Every purple player plays it when they see the opportunity, and it's a very easy 1-2 punch. And it wins more games than it should, but it does. And then, like I said, if you guys want to see a card by card breakdown for decks, we'll do that. But like I said, we're just going to go over leaders. And so with those 4 leaders, this is where you kind of get the cornerstone of the 4 colors. Whereas that this is what the 4 colors want to do in essence. Purple and green don't say a lot about how decks are played with their leader abilities. Luffy and Croc do, but green and Kid and Kaido don't really help the player understand what they're supposed to do with their deck. The other leaders do a better job. It gives a player an idea how they need to play their decks, which we'll cover right now. And we're going to cover leaders for set 1 and set 2. Just because set 2 is around the corner, and we'll see based off time what we do. So for set 1s, let's talk about Zoro. So hold on, I don't like this. We're gonna flex on arts out here. So for Zoro, he's a very simple effect. Red is meant to be a very simple game plan for the most part. Where it's that you want to overwhelm your opponent, you want to have and you just want to be able to hit them. Zoro amplifies that. You give them a Dawn, all your characters gain 1,000. It's a very simple effect. This informs you that you get the most benefit from him from having the most characters on board. That's what his effect reads in the most part. Because for 1 Dawn, you could essentially say you gave 1,000 to six of your characters / units, you know? Because 1 for your leader and then 5 for your characters. He's very strong. And he's very simplistic. And that's where red has to come in control, where it's like your deck maybe has a low floor, but it has a pretty high ceiling, because even though your lines are kind of linear, you can't just throw your whole board into it. You kind of like the swordsman that Zoro is, you have to find that moment when you go for the kill. Like, yes, you drop and you weaken your opponent, but you wait, but you're kind of waiting for that moment where you're like, I'm going to swing at him 5 times when I know he has no guard for the kill. not for the damage. And that's something where as a player you kind of have to feel the board that you're playing on, where it's that if 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 Zoro if I'm playing Zoro and my opponent has a full board, is it better for me to do the whole onslaught onto the board, this whole onslaught to his face? And that is something that you will learn with time, playing, and understanding where Zoro hits strong and where Zoro doesn't. Um, Zoro is also a character that, just based on how Red is, their early game to mid game is very strong. You could build for the late game, but they thrive in the early mid game. That's where Zoro thrives. Um, and then what you're trying to do for late game is have your opponent lose cards. So if you like a heavy aggression, Zoro's the way to go. The next leader we have is Law. Law, he's one of my favorite characters from the show, and second, one of my favorite cards in the game. He is the easiest way I can explain it. It's that he has the most text out of all the leaders, so in turn, he's the most complex of all the leaders, and that's kind of like an easy way to kind of just visually see what you're about to go into when you play Law. Now, Law is a very combo heavy deck. It's a very, for people that know, it's a very Yu-Gi-Oh style deck where it's combos, card advantage, card advantage, card advantage. And you play two really good colors, which is red and green. And with those two colors, you literally get to do almost everything that you wanted to do. Where when it comes to do I want to be defensive? Do I want to be offensive? Do I want to restand my characters? Do I want to search? Do I want to fight for the board? Do I want to just go straight for face? He lets you have all those options and eat it too. Now, his effect only works if you have 5 characters on the board, which is where he's balanced. Because if you don't have a board, you can't use his effect. If you can't use his effect, you're playing things for hard cost. And a lot of his, and he doesn't play anything over 5 costs, except if they want to play the big kid for control Law. But if they play aggro Law, there's nothing they have that costs more than 5 dot. And then on that turn, that's where if you drop something big, they have a hard time dealing with it because they're very strong with multiple 5, 6K attacks. But when you ask them to go higher, they have a hard time doing it because if they have to invest more Dawn for a higher attack, then they don't get the combo, and that's where you pick and choose. So when you're deciding to pick Law, it's do I like the combo, and can I think of adapting my play to change up my combos? Because a lot of Law, it means a lot of adapting, and you need to be able to adapt your play to play Law. Because there's going to be moments where you have the board, and there's going to be moments that you lost the board. And then because he's very color reliant, because when the card that you bounce has to be a different color than the card that you play, you have to set up accordingly to make sure, all right, next turn I want to do this, I need to make sure I have a green on board if I want to play this red, or I need to have a red on board if I want to play this green. You need to think 3 turns ahead, and when you're choosing the block correctly. Now, this is the red green Luffy. And for those who want to try, who like red green as a color concept, which is an early game aggression of red and the control of green, but you don't want to feel fragile, you could play this. Now what this Luffy does is you pay for, you restand a supernova. And all the supernovas are pretty good. And be able to swing twice with an unblockable Luffy, because there's a 5-cost supernova Luffy that's in the red structure deck. You give him 2 Dawn, he's unblockable. So what you could do is you go is like you have the Luffy on board, you give him 6 Dawn. He's 12k unblockable, so the blockers can't do anything. You swing at you swing at it. You swing at your opponent. Pay 4, restand, swing 12k unblockable again. That's 2 damage your opponent can't block, and odds are they don't have the guard. So he's a much more of like, I want to play law cards, but I want to play a simplistic game, and that's where Luffy comes in. Not saying that because LoL's better, you can't play Luffy. It's just the mindset you need to have, and that's where some characters, I mean, some players feel off because it's like, well, I'm playing all the same cards as LoL. How come I can't win? It's a different mindset and a different game, and you have to. And then when you build this list, you have to accommodate that the leader Luffy is meant to restand, and then you got to ask yourself, how often am I planning to actually restand my characters for this? And that's just something that you as a player need to come to the understanding of, and seeing where do you find comfort in your play. So guys, this is Odin, and for Odin, the kind of mindset you want if you're gonna play Odin, he's not the most popular green leader, but he's one of your options, and if he makes sense to you, then he makes sense to you. You discard a card to give yourself 2 Dawn. That's essentially what the card says in the whole grand scheme of it all. And it's saying that, do you value, are you willing to give up cards for additional Dawn? And that's what your thought process when you play as Odin is the 2 extra Dawn worth a card? And if that type of playstyle makes sense to you, then this is a way that you can go with it. Now, personally, I value a card more than 2 Dawn, especially because if I'm using the 2 Dawn, I'm playing another card, so I'm essentially dropping my hand by 2 cards a turn to use this effect proper. Now, sometimes to make that good board, that good solid board, you do need that 2 Dawn, and that card isn't worth it. If One Piece had a Dawn stacking mechanic, kind of like how Magic has floating mana, if we had floating Dawn, then this guy would be tier 0. But unfortunately, we don't have like floating Dawn. He has a playstyle that some players resonate with, and even though I may not see it, it does good at the what I believe it does good at the local level. There's people that take it to big events. It hasn't topped anything, but who knows? Maybe in set 2, people resonate with this more. I know a lot of people are going to enjoy Kinemon more, but that's just where this card stands. People know me because of this card. Doflamingo is the blue leader of choice more often than not in current set 1. He allows the opponent, he allows the player to be aggressive, to generate characters. And now remember that thing we talked about with Croc, where it was like we talked about tempo, how Doflamingo's take on tempo is, instead of me controlling the board, I'm playing 2 characters a turn versus my opponent more often not playing 1 character a turn. Now that's not a 1-for-1 comparison, but that's the mindset of it, where it's that when my opponent plays a character, I'm playing 1 from hand and then 1 from Doflamingo. So that's the general concept of Doflamingo as a character, is that instead of tempo of bouncing, it's tempo of bodies. And that's just where this decides its own tempo play. So if you like the idea of like generating cards from the top of your deck and stacking so you know what you're drawing, this is the deck for you. Now, with that said, because he only generates 4 cost or less cards, this deck has a hard time dealing with bigger bodies, because the only way it deals with bigger bodies, that it does play big bodies like the 7 cost Doflamingo or the 9 cost Mihawk or the 5 cost Virgo. But the issue with those cards is that for you to deal with other big cards, you had to drop those prematurely. And because you have to drop them prematurely, your opponent has a chance to deal with them before dropping even their big thing. And in the current game, where some versions of red or green, if they drop their big guy first, blue is on the back end. But for this deck, you're trying to play for a strong mid game, because that's where this deck thrives, is in the mid game, and you're trying to control the whole game in this small section. So when we get to late game, you can keep going, and that's the mindset you need to have when you play a deck like Doflamingo. And that's kind of where we are off with Doflamingo, is that he's tempo in regards to generating more bodies instead of controlling the amount of bodies your opponent has. And then now we come to Kaido. For this man, it's you give him a Dawn, and whenever you KO, whether it's by battle or by card effect, you get another Dawn as active back from the Dawn deck. Now, the way you want to think about him when you're playing your game or constructing your deck is that you get the most advantage out of him when you play cards that pop cards, so you could generate your Dawn. But you have to remember, you have to give him a Dawn. So you're always going to play with a Dawn short for your plays. You're always going to play a Dawn short, and then from there, you still got to do your original plays. Now, that makes, for example, the 9-drop Kaido, because he gives up 5 to pop and banish. It's now a 4 generate Dawn. You start, and then if you have the castle, instead of starting your next turn on 7 or 8, you're starting on your turn on 8 or 9, which is huge, because you could possibly go 9-drop Kaido if you have the stage go, and you're at 10, go give him 1, drop 9-drop Kaido, 9-drop Kaido effect, send 5 back to the Dawn deck, send 5 back to the Dawn deck, pop rush. This Kaido's effect, you'll get 1 back, so now you're back at 6 Dawn. Then the castle to give you 7. Next turn, you go you gain 2 for your turn. You're back at 9. Then castle, you have 10 Dawn, but you have 9 active, and that's I think is probably his most powerful play. Because you go back to back Kaido with him, and that's fairly strong. It's just he's purple kind of has a rough time in the early game to do all this. So that's just the issue when it comes to Kaido in this aspect. But he still has potential. You get an extra set of blockers with blue. It is what it is. He's a fairly good guy, and leader, and hopefully there's some people that resonate with this, and this is their leader that they resonate and connect with, and it makes sense to them. Crocodile, Thorbo Crocodile, he's a very controlled piece. So he has his own theme deck, where it's all about Baroque's works and events and controlling the board. And his whole concept is that he has so many events and so many cards that counter for advantage. That's where he thrives. So if you're the kind of player that's like, I want to be able to play with my hand and slowly kill your opponent, but you're guarding from here all the time, for the most part, that's where this deck thrives. This is if I had to compare this to any card game, this would be the equivalent to, let's say, to all of my Yu-Gi-Oh players out there. If you ever played Magical Musketeers, that's what this deck mostly reminds me of, where it's like all your spells and traps are in hand. You don't have to set them to the board, and you just play them. You have your blockers like Miss All Sunday that generates you more events. Um, and you play other blockers and you play other big cards. But your main resource is an advantage engine that you're controlling with your purple cards and you're defending with your blue cards. And that's where the mindset that you have when you play this. It's a very good deck. It does get overwhelmed when you do when there's a full board of 5Ks and they're all swinging for you for 5. You kind of lose your hand very fast, but you still have a much control, much resources, and if you can stay on top of your opponent, odds are you come up on top when you play this deck. And it's just resources in the battle phase essentially, for this deck. The last character for set 1 is King. Unfortunately, as much as we talked about Odin, where Odin wasn't in a great spot, this is in a worse spot, to the point where I forget sometimes that he's a leader. And his is literally, if you have 10 Dawn on your field, give all your opponent's characters -1,000. Purple never really sits at 10 Dawn, unfortunately. If they're at 10 Dawn, that's almost unheard of, because either on their 10 Dawn play they dropped a king or a queen or something that ate a Dawn, so you're not at 10 anyways, or you dropped the 10 Kaido, or the 10 drop Kaido and blew up the board, or you dropped the 9 cost Kaido and ate up your Dawn, so you're not at 10. And it's just awkward that that they made this list. I think their idea of this leader was that they wanted a purple deck that benefited people for staying at 10 Dawn. But because, like, if this would have said for both turns, then there would have been an argument for, maybe we play purple without trying to blow things up, because now my guys essentially gain 1,000 because my opponent lost 1,000, and now my opponent has to work harder to kill my character because all their things are -1,000. But because it's only on your turn and it doesn't affect your opponent at all, this card literally literally does nothing for even most of the game, because you can't even benefit from him until you're at 10 Dawn. So from turn 1 to 4, he does nothing. He's just a 5K dude. And that's just where the failure in this card design is. Now, Whitebeard is a very strong card because he's the only leader with 6 life and the only leader with 6K attack. Granted, his effect makes him lose a life every turn, but a lot of his cards are very strong in the deck, but they require you to either discard Whitebeard cards or to have Whitebeard as a Whitebeard pirate as a leader. So with that, I mean, because he's the only Whitebeard pirate leader we have as of set 2, we get Ace in set 3. He's very strong, but he is a leader that you won't realize his strengths until practice, when you realize your opponent struggles to deal with a 6K leader. And the mindset is that you're being this very strong character, and you're the very strong leader, and your characters support you being this strong, overpowered leader. And your events help you from dying, and you have other characters that slow down you burning your life. But this deck is very adamant about that he's a 6K leader, and all those cards emphasize that. So if you want to play a red deck that has some red aspects of like aggression, but you have a very top end leader, this is the deck for you. The next one we're going to go over is Garp. I feel he's the most combo heavy of black. Now what black does as a whole, it's they lower the cost of cards and then they have cards that pop certain cost cards. So you're essentially bringing the cost of cards down, so then you can pop them. That's what black does as an aspect. Now, what Garp does is very, you give him a Dawn, you can lower the cost of cards, and then you play cards like Kobe, who kill three cards that cost 3 or less by discarding a card. And that's kind of the mindset you have, where it's that Garp allows you to essentially kill anything, because you could just give him the Dawn to lower one thing or multiple things, and then you play your cards that pop things to accommodate. And then if you don't need to control with black, you have your red cards to help deal the damage, and that's where he's strong. I feel there's another black dual color leader later that I feel is stronger than Garp, but he's still a very well ideal card. So your mindset here is lower the cost of cards and be aggressive. Unfortunately, red doesn't deal with cost of cards; they deal with power. So if this was like a red-blue card, this will be better. But that's why the next dual color black card fits the dynamic of black better, and we'll get to that in a minute. The next card we're gonna go is Kinemon. He's the next Land of Wano leader we get. He's very strong. What he does is essentially, if you have 1 or less characters and you want to play a character that costs 3 or more, reduce his cost by 1. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a very good card. You play 3 cost cards. If you're going second, you play them on 2, 5 costs on 4, or you play 4 costs on 3. The moment you start doing that more than once, and you realize that you're saving 10 to 15 Dawn a game, it adds up. It adds up very fast. The more you play it, the more you're like, this is crazy. This is fantastic. I'm playing big cards for cheap. You essentially are playing a deck where you have a 10% off coupon to everything. And that's how this deck thrives. Think of it as, I'm playing cards with a 10% coupon. And that's the idea when it comes to Kinemon. Now, the next one we have is Sanji.
Now, thoughts about Sanji. The way I believe Sanjay plays, the way I interpretate this is that there's a lot of, for example, there's a lot of film cards that when you play them, you special out other ones. And I think that's the false bait of this deck. The way I see this deck is that you play a bunch of vanilla and of like vanilla characters. And you would think, yeah, duh, like that's how Sanji effects goes off. But this is the mindset you need to have. Kind of like how Dolphy plays on tempo by generating other bodies. What he is doing is because Dolphy generates by bringing 1 tapped and you pay 1. His are coming out untapped, active, and they are less threatened by your opponent's things. Now, you could generate a bunch of guys real fast because you're getting 2 Dawn for free. You're not doing anything special like discarding a card like Odin or anything like that. You're just generating 2 Dawn. And then you can play things like the 3 cost Usopp, because then when you play him, you go back, you go to 2. If you're playing it on curve, you have 2 Dawn, and then you can play an event if you want, or if you play 2 cost. But I think what it is, you're trying to flood the board with really high static characters, early game to mid game, and then you're controlling the board there. And then you just play some really strong top caliber boss characters for later. Like I can see Odin really strong in here because there's already some pretty decent vanilla Land of Wano cards. And then on top of that, you could go for example, build your board past Odin where, let's say you're at 10 Dawn, you play a 4 cost vanilla, tap, untap 2, you're back at 8, drop Odin. Now you did a really and then if you play a 4-drop vanilla, you have a 6k, 8k, the 8k gets to restand and do things like that. Or you could double down on the tempo and do things kind of like where you can go you can go you're at 10 Dawn, for example, play a 3-cost vanilla, which is a 5k, restand, you're back at 9, play the 9-cost Mihawk, bounce an opponent's thing. You've now generated a 5k, a 9k, and bounce the 7 or less back to the bottom of the deck where they have. And I think that's how Sanji is going to end up playing. It's a very simplistic tempo game where you're like, I'm playing double my value. And that's my thoughts when it comes to Sanji. I think it requires a little bit more more testing, more theory crafting, but that's my early thoughts about Sanji, and that's where I think the character stands when it comes to play style and what I think players need to come with the idea when they come to play Sanji. The next one we're going to talk about is Ivankov. This is who all the cool blue players are going to go to next. His ability is very strong. That cannot be ignored. On the end of your turn, if you have 0 cards, draw 2 cards. So essentially, you're drawing 3 cards a turn. 3 cards a turn, your draw phase, and then your end of phase where you draw 2 more cards. And then all of his cards in the deck require, so you have no hand. So it's kind of like playing Infernity, if to all my Yu-Gi-Oh players out there, where it's that your cards can be played, but they're played better when you have like 1 to 0 cards in hand, and then those cards pop off because you're foregoing your hand and you're allowing your board to be strong enough to deal with itself, and you overwhelm the opponent. Like I said, we can go by card for all the decks, but when you have this mindset, it's you as a player being okay that your hand is going to be 2 to 3 cards when your turn is over, no matter what. And if you're not okay with that, I don't recommend playing this deck. This deck is I believe a very high skill ceiling and a very much comfort game where you need to feel comfortable with the way that you're playing, so that way you can proceed with your wins and with your games. Because playing this game and only having 2 cards in hand at the end of the turn, it's a very scary place to be in if you're not comfortable with your sequencing, with properly attacking, with things like that. So if you feel comfort under pressure, this is a fantastic deck. You're going to go through your deck. Probably by the time the game is over, you've probably gone through 80% of your deck. But it's a very much of a you live in this make or break moment, and you build on top of those. It's a very strong deck, very strong cards. It's just you will not have a hand most of the time. You have 2 cards, but those 2 cards, they're good, they're defense or whatever. You just need to be comfortable with yourself that these cards need to help you get to the next turn or play your next turn. Now, Magellan. This is my purple deck for next set. I feel it's very strong. His effect is very... his deck thrives more with the cards within the deck. That is not really his leader effect. But his leader effect is still very good. It's once per turn whenever a Dawn is put from the field back to the deck. So he has cards that even push your opponent's Dawn back into the deck. So he generates 1,000 when that happens, but it only happens once. So pretty much what's happening is you're playing purple because you're always going to put a Dawn back into the Dawn deck, and then he gains 1,000.
There's nothing spectacular, but purple as a control option where you don't have to invest Dawn into your leader is very nice because that means you get to play with a full set of 10 and you're not having to really worry about giving your leader a Dawn. So it's very nice in that aspect. Um, so it's kind of like his ability is kind of like a quality of life change if you look at him in a vacuum. But a lot of his cards are just very good. They search out each other. They generate Dawn. And he's just, I think, him and his deck is a very strong purple deck to be playing. And unfortunately, without going into all the cards, I can't talk about how strong he is. But the fact that he's an impel down leader matters a lot in set 2. All right, let's go to Z. Now, this is Z is tied with Smoker, in my opinion, of the two of the best black leader. I'm still back and forth between the two. Because Z, what black does, supports purple extremely well. I would argue to say these two colors were meant for each other. Like in set 1, red green law was very good because cool, we had Bonnie that searched out cards that were in both colors. That's great. And Nami could sometimes do that. In set 2 she could do it more. But okay, but that's as much as the of them working together wins. Now, this is different because black lowers the cost of all of these characters, while purple has cards that say kill a 3 or less, kill a 6 or less, kill a 4 or less, kill a 3, kill a 2, you know? Now, what black does, so black could lower these cards, and then you could play these purple cards for tempo, kill things on the board, and that's like this cool little like give and take of the deck where they're working harmoniously together with these two colors. And then there's a really cool play with this deck where you can go, there's a 10 drop character, Kuzan, and what he does is when he's on the board, minus everything by 5, and then he says whatever costs on play, if it costs 0, kill it. What Z does is you pick 4 Dawn, put it back into the Dawn deck, kill a 3 or less. So when he's attacking, so what happens is that the Kuzan kills a 5 or less. Z on just attacking becomes a 6k because he gains 1,000 when he does his effect. Becomes a 6k, and then he kills a 3 or less. But because Kuzan is lowering everything by 5. So things that are like 8 costs are now 3. He kills 8 cost cards for just attacking. It's a very strong combo that makes late game very strong. And because black has a fantastic blocker, and then purple has amazing offensive cards, this is where I feel this deck thrives. It's a very the way this deck it's going to end up being played, and it's the mindset you need to have when you come into it, is I'm going to be very protective for the early game and most of mid game, but the moment it's late game, the game is mine to run off with, because you're going to control the board, you're going to control everything that happens. Your most scariest one issue is going to be red, because you are at 4 life. And even though you have a huge amount of blockers, they have unblockables and they have rush. But this deck is still very strong. If you like playing games where you want to turtle up and then later become like this hulking, smashing beast, this is the deck. This is the leader for you. All right, and to Smoker. So for Smoker, he's the best way I could describe him as a card He's everything that black manifests to be. So with that said, what he wants to do is he wants to just lower something by 1 and F is 0, he gains 1,000. Cool. You give him a Dawn, he's 6k, he becomes 7. 7's a fantastic number. He's kind of like another Z, where he's just his own aggression piece, where he's like, I'm a valuable piece, and he lowers things by 1 cost, which is something where in black, especially on mono black, where you're focusing more on trying to lower things, that matters. And having an infinite -1 is very nice, without you having to invest a lot of Dawn like with Garp. But Garp could lower something down a lot. He only lowers it down by 1, but he also gives himself 1,000 if he can make it 0. So he could -1 to a blocker, swing for 7, and then odds are they're going to force you to use the blocker. But now you put him in a situation where it's that you either drop 3k or you use the blocker, and that's just his strong ability as a leader, where he could stand on his own. And I do enjoy leaders that they can stand on their own and they don't need like that, like they're not the gimmick of the deck, but they're also a piece of the deck. All right. And now this is all set 3 stuff. Now this stuff technically isn't set 2, but it was after set 1, so we put it in this part. And first we're gonna go with Uta. Uta is, in a weird way, some weird combination between Zoro and Sanji, because it's a red character that boosts up characters with no effects. This is in the film structure deck. Well, the film promo deck. I don't think it's I wish I can give proper knowledge for this card, but it's almost like you could do it, you could play it if you like the character. I ain't gonna stop you. No one should stop. Thing to be said, no one should ever stop you from playing a leader you want to play. This game, at the end of the day, is about your enjoyment of the game. Because even if you're competitive, if you don't enjoy the game, you're not going to continue your competitive career with the game. Because if you hate the game, what's the point of being competitive in it? If it's like working a job that you hate the work at that point. So that's why, like, if you find the sauce and you found a way to make Uta top tier and it makes sense to you, power to you. You go to treasure cups, you go to regionals, you go to whatever you need to do to live your best life, and I will be there supporting you every step of the way. But to a mindset, it's very much a vanilla beat type of deck, and you're trying to go with big numbers, and then Uta just helps you make bigger numbers. But that's just kind of what it is for her. Then, excuse me, because I can never pronounce this right, but Awasaka Zuki. He is the black leader in the structure deck. He's definitely your more generic black leader, where if you pay 3, you pay 3, you discard a card, and then you KO a character with 0. And the whole premise is that there's cards that lower cards to 0, and then you pop them. It's still a very good leader, still a very good control tool. It gets rid of blockers very efficiently. It's something that you just control the board. It's almost the same as Z, but instead of losing Dawn, you're just paying your 3.
Um, and because black has more control, has more cards to deal with cost, that's just something that that you just see on the other spectrum, where it's that you're less aggressive, you're more protective, and then the Kuzan is much more needed, because then what happens is you go Kuzan. Unfortunately, you can't use his effect same turn to do Kuzan, but then the next turn, he's almost free. You're not losing Dawn like with Z. Because with Z, when you start the Z Kuzan combo, you don't get to continue on with your plays like normal. You're playing very low to the ground because you're losing Dawn. But with him, you're the next turn you're going to be at 10. So if you like being able to lower cost but not have to worry about your Dawn management, this is a much more control black leader that helps you in that case. And then the last leader is Shanks. So, ironically enough, I haven't played against this too much, but I played against it a few times and I underestimated this card. Unfortunately, you can't put it in other decks, and unfortunately, you can't toy around with the cards, at least as of right now, because we only have so many film type characters that are purple. But he does amazing. He's the main concept is you build your board, and then you wait for the opportunity that your opponent even has like 4 cards in hand, because when he increases everyone by 2k and then goes wild and he just unloads the board. It's the best way I could explain it is, imagine if you had a shotgun and you spent 5 turns to load up the shotgun, and then you pull the trigger, and then but you need a kill when you pull that trigger, because once you pull the trigger and you swing with all 5 of your characters, and you don't kill your opponent and your opponent can kill your board, he does fall off. But he does get that one, like once you pull that shot, it goes off. It goes off very fast, very and it takes games. It honestly takes games. This is a more of like build a castle, attack. This is more of like if purple was a glass cannon aggressor, and that's what this is. It's purple as a glass cannon deck where your board is very fragile, and you're hoping that you can set up the board right so your opponent doesn't take advantage of you. But it's a very strong purple aggro deck leader. Now that covers all the leaders for now until we get to set 3. I hope I was able to help people understand certain decks, maybe help them make sense of things, because maybe I talked about a deck and it didn't make sense to you, but it made sense to someone else. And as long as it made sense to you, then you could pilot it, and then you could go ahead, become King of the Pirates, play with your leader, have fun, go to events, do what you need to do, and practice. And with that said, like, subscribe, it helps with everything. From here to there, I just want to say, have a great day and see you next time.